dark. That's where the light comes from, yeah.
You know, to whom much is given, much is required. So we have received much by coming to a country like this. You experience those liberal democracy principles and benefit from it. And we should at least use that to build our community here to accommodate different views. So now I'll come to the last part of
Yes.
our conversation. If you don't have anything to add to the next, to the previous one, is there something you would like to add before we move to the next one, Patricia?
No, go ahead, Daniel.
Okay. So the second one is that how to have that civil dialogue we're talking about currently. I think we've touched on it already, that using, you know, the human right language, not inciting violence, is quite important to engage in meaningful dialogue. And at the end of the day, is we trying to bring the truth forward so we can build peace that we all benefit from. So, is there something you would like to share around this in terms of especially social media?
Well, I, I believe dialogue work that community groups. I was involved in dialogue with diaspora communities from Rwanda, Burundi, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Uganda. These 4 countries represent the Great Lakes region of Africa, and the diaspora community from these countries who are in Sydney were interested to want to do some work on so that they could get to reconnect with their members of their community from the other countries. And this was a great thing to come forward, because they felt they're living in Australia now, and they thought we need now to live together, because here in Australia we are able to live peacefully and coexist together, even though back home our people from our different countries have been fighting with each other. But here, the Rwandans and the Burundians and the Congolese and the Ugandans are coexisting and living peacefully together. So they wanted to work on having a dialogue, community dialogue amongst these groups. And so this is the sort of way it starts, Daniel. It starts by people sitting down around a table. We call it round table, and sharing something together, sharing a meal, sharing a conversation, telling your story. And it starts with that. And that is how you start a dialogue. And it's the importance, particularly of telling your story, is a very, very powerful way to embark on a dialogue. And this is one of the ways we could start with the diaspora community, to conduct dialogue amongst its members, to try to get to hear their stories about what they believe is the situation, and how it has affected them, what the situation is for them at the moment, and being able to share that with others. And I think this is an important way that everyone can get a chance to tell their story, as a way to start a dialogue amongst the members of the diaspora community. And we're living in a technical world where digital communication is now internet, and internet is the most common form of communication. And I think, Daniel, of course, it has improved many of our lives in many different ways. But in some ways, too, it has also caused some difficulties and some problems and issues. You hear of, for example, amongst a lot of young people, this whole issue of cyberbullying and all sorts of very, what we would call destructive and harmful language being used on social media, which is often very violent language, and creating a lot of fear and of course, problems for people in trying to get the truth and get the facts about what's going on. So the social media area is an important area, and this is where the youth can play an important part to be able to use the social media as a force for good, not for. And by doing that, it's about being able to, for example, uh, teach and train people to use language of peace and not violent language like hate speech and speech that creates fear in the community. And often a lot of the information is not factual information that creates even more fear. So the social media could be an area where we can improve the language by explaining to people about the importance of using non-violent language.
Excellent. So now here it brings us to the, I guess there's a fine balance between that freedom of speech and hate speech. So what is the distinction there?
I think the freedom of speech is that's the most important human rights we have. It's our fundamental freedom, and that is something that is very it's universal, and it's important because it is a human right, and each human being has the right to have freedom of speech. That is something we need to protect. So, Daniel, we must ensure that we will always have freedom of speech. Now, of course, you can't stop people saying what they want to say, and it may not be pleasant what people say because often people say what they want to say, and sometimes it can come out being very violent, it can be hateful, and so forth. And this is where really it's a situation that there's really very little we can do about that, because if freedom of speech, you can't stop someone from wanting to say what they want to say. And in some ways, there might be, in the case of social media, often there might be ways in which the tech companies can address those issues when they become very serious. But at this stage, it's not so easy to deal with hate speech unless, for example, like I said, uh, you you can look at finding ways in which you can find a way to be able to get them to come to sit down and come and talk to people in a way that they can be in a position to understand that their communication is actually not creating a situation of peace, but actually creating more fuel of more anger and hate. So I think this is a very difficult question, but the most important thing is that is a principle that is a universal principle. It's a human rights, and that we have to protect for everybody.
Yeah, the reason I asked that question is that I do come across a lot of media outlets that restrict people from speaking what they think if it doesn't conform to the majority view. And so saying something that, different, saying something that is controversial at times, is labeled as hate speech, and either the person's access to that social media has been removed. And I know you referred to the tech companies taking that responsibility. And I was just thinking, how do we find that fine balance? Do we hand it over to the government? I know recently when the New South Wales government passed the inciting violence law, I was invited actually to be part of the workshop in terms of how to get the message out to the community. The So it was a very difficult one to craft in terms of how to even communicate it to the community. So the lawyers and the legal people find it hard. And even if you're trying to bring it to the community, the distinction or the separation is not quite clear. So get all muddled up. And if we hand it over to the tech company, they might obviously, it could be biased to their own view. So how do you see it as a human rights lecturer?
Yes. It's an ongoing issue for all of us involved in this issue of fundamental freedoms and being able to educate people about our fundamental freedoms. Because freedom of speech is such an important human right, it's up there with the right to life, the right to be able to come together as an assembly, in a group, the right to be able to worship in a church, or have the right to have a religious worship. I mean, the freedom of speech is absolutely fundamental human right. And the problem here is the social that are happening in the society that make this issue difficult for a lot of people to be able to have the freedom of speech, because of different groups of people who may not agree with that speech, versus governments who might want to control certain groups to not allow them to free. And then there's cultural norms, particular groups of people, community groups, who don't believe that they should be able to speak about certain topics. For example, we have in society, there's certain topics, for example, that are taboo. And it's just the social norms that's happening in society that dictates that. It's not about a government or so forth. It's just that we have social norms and standards that are already operating in the society that controls this ability of freedom of speech. So, Daniel, it's very complicated. It's not something that I think it's easy to deal with, because, as you know, we still have a lot of hate speech now. We still continue, and it happens in every country. It's happening in all countries, and particularly with the social media, it's in some places getting out of control, of course. And that's one of the reasons why we need to be able to go back to educating the people that the fundamental human right, freedom of speech, is something that must be protected. We cannot take that away from every human being.
Absolutely. And I think coming back to the show, which has a phrase Imago Dei, a Latin word for image of God. And that image of God, what does it mean to be made an image of God? One is ability to speak, ability to produce, and to create a speech and to express ourselves. So that is a gift from God. And we do have responsibility. That's why the human rights and responsibility part goes together. The ability to speak is a gift, but also has responsibility, because with what we speak, many could suffer unnecessary, affliction. So it is important. And I agree that the balance is a very delicate one. It's something that we still, the legal judicial system is still wrestling with, and as individuals we still wrestle with. But finally, call to action. People who would like to contribute and support the humanitarian crisis, appeal, what could they do?
At the moment, the whole world is responding to the crisis in Ethiopia by providing assistance to, particularly to the people who have had to flee, and many of them fleeing from Tigray going into Sudan. And there is already an emergency appeal by UNHCR and also many other organizations that they work with, to provide assistance to the people who have fled the fighting. And I've heard the figure in the thousands. Just one day, there was 4,000 people just in one day to Sudan. And some of the makeshift camps that they have had to suddenly, put up to accommodate all these people. They only accommodate for some of them for less than 1,000 people. So if one day 4,000 people have crossed, this is going to make a big need for the community to assist the humanitarian agencies who are working on the ground in Sudan to be able to register the families, to provide them with shelter, from food and water and health. So I think it's important that we could all do something practical by providing assistance to organizations such as UNHCR.
Excellent. And finally, and I know that people who do say they stand with Dr. Abiy with this war, and there's on the other side the people who say they stand with the TPLF on the other side of the war. How could those two groups still contribute to this appeal?
Well, I think the situation is that it doesn't matter what your views are about who is who you support. This is a humanitarian issue now. These are civilian people who have nothing to do with the TPLF or nothing to do with the government's decisions and what actions they've taken. So we should not we should be assisting all these people who have just fled from their villages, because they are civilian people, and most of them are women and children. And it's not about choosing which people we assist. We should be assisting all of them. We have to look at the people, the people who have been the victims of this fighting between these two groups, and we need to assist them, because the people who are suffering, people who have taken sides, they are people who have been affected by the government TPLF. So we need to assist these people, because they are people who are innocent and suffering, mostly women and children. So we are appealing to get the community here to help these people, and these people are the ones really suffering.
Excellent. Well said. So thank you so much. Really appreciate, Patricia, for your input, for your wisdom and knowledge, for sharing it on Imago Day, Made an Image of God. The reason that we are here is that because we value the sanctity of human life, and we also see the responsibility that each one of us has towards each other and for ourselves. And that way, then we can have genuine, long-lasting peace. So thank you so much, Patricia Garcia. Look forward to having you in another episode regarding to human rights matters.
Made in the image of God. That's where the light